Hey everybody, welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep 'em flying.
Good evening, airplane fans, and welcome to this episode of CAF Warbird Tube. We are glad to have you with us tonight. And this is episode number 203. And we're going to be talking with David O'Malley, who is with the Tri-State Warbird Museum in Batavia, Ohio. He is the president of that museum. And we'll talk to him about some of the aircraft that are in the museum and some of the activities that take place at that famous airport in Ohio. Now, whether you're joining us for the very first time or you're a loyal Warbird Tube fan, glad to have you with us. If you don't mind, if you enjoy what you see tonight, please share it across your social media platforms. We do appreciate all the promotional help that we can get and continue to expand the audience of Warbird Tube. Now, Warbird Tube is made possible by the Commemorative Air Force. To find out more about our events, our aircraft, lots of aircraft going on tour this spring and summer. You can also find out about local units or how you can be a personal part of the fun. Visit our website, commemorativeairforce.org. Now, as you're watching tonight, if you have some questions, type those in the chat box. We'll try to answer them either during the presentation or before we sign off. And joining me now from Batavia, Ohio, from the Tri-State Warbird Museum, David O'Malley. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about you first. How did you get involved in aviation and then specifically in warbirds?
Nepotism, I guess. The loose definition of the word, from my father. My father is a lifelong aviator. He kind of grew up in the era where the aspirational Eastern Airlines pilot gig was be all end all for an aspiring professional pilot, and that was what he wanted to do. And you know, everything happens for a reason, and he ended up selling insurance in the process of getting through all the prereqs to get an interview with Eastern. And by the time all that kind of settled out, turns out he really enjoyed the insurance business and he was doing really well at it. And so he decided that aviation was a hobby and insurance was the business. And, you know, that's how he went through life. And so he passed on a love of airplanes and aviation to me. And he got to a point in life where he grew up in the era where the P-51 Mustang was the pinup poster on his bedroom wall. And he generated enough flying experience that deciding to go out and point at that goal was realistic. And step one was get a pilot maker. So he bought a T6 and met Paul Redlick through that. And one thing led to another. And Mustang project happened, and so he was kind of involving himself in the warbird world and met some local veterans, Herb Heilbrunn and John Lair. I've got a picture of him right here. He had them speak at my school. Herb was a B-17 pilot. John was a Tuskegee Airman, and they're standing shoulder to shoulder in their third grade class picture. And it took them until the late 90s or early 2000s to figure that out. And he had them speak at my school, and they just brought the house down. You know, auditorium with several hundred elementary school kids in it, just pin drop silent with all these kids riveted to what these two old men were on stage talking about. And it was kind of one of those watershed moments where he's kind of pondering what had happened and came to the realization that the basis for what was going on was these kids were being confronted with real human stories that they could connect to. Most kids, you know, there were some that were certainly interested in textbook World War II history from social studies, but a lot of them, it wasn't something that really interested them was letters on a page. But once they were confronted with the reality of someone that wasn't that much older than them having these harrowing tales, you know, Herb pulled out a piece of flak that he brought home, and that really kind of brought it home for a lot of people how dangerous and amazing what these men and women had been through in World War II. And like, well, why is this new and why is this unique? And so unknown to them. The reality was that they weren't being exposed to those stories, and so the idea for the foundation of the museum kind of focused on that. Like, we need to preserve these stories of these heroes so that the kids of today, which was 20 years ago, but even now, can learn from those stories and from those real people who did those very incredible things that, saved the world at the time.
What year was the museum founded?
2003 was when it was founded. The initial building was completed in 2004. The kind of getting together of actually making it something more than just a hangar ended up taking about a year. We opened to the public in 2005.
Okay. And what about your background in aviation? Obviously, growing up with your dad being an aviator, you probably got an early start as well.
Yeah, I did some flying in my younger years in high school. I went to college in North Carolina and diverted my destruction of money into automobiles. And so I started racing cars down there, and that kind of took me away from aviation for a while. He asked me to come work for the museum in 2016 full time. And so that kind of brought me back to Ohio. And well, I guess my wife really brought me back to Ohio, and then museum job brought me back to Cincinnati. And so he asked me to join the museum as vice chairman under Paul Redlich. And when Paul retired in 2018, I assumed the role of president, and that's where we've been ever since.
So in the role of president, I'm sure you have many, many duties, and several of them must be flying airplanes, right?
No, it does not.
No?
It's something I could do.
Okay.
And as I told my wife when she asked me why I don't fly any of them, I said, I look at that as like a personal pursuit. And the artifact and the value of the airplane, like, the airplanes are here for the people, and I didn't really see it as like, I'm going to go fly my dad's airplane museum's collection of airplanes. Another component of it was that racing was a really big part of my life, and the time and dedication to do some sort of hobby or part-time thing. There's only so much time in the world, and for whatever reason, race cars got my heart a long time ago, and they haven't let go.
What kind of racing did you do?
Sports car racing with the Sports Car Club of America.
Very good.
Yeah.
And how many people are working at the museum? And I'm sure there's a volunteer component as well.
Yeah. So you said that many roles. The reality is that at a nonprofit of any kind, everyone wears a lot of hats. And so everyone's job description is probably a little bit muddled. But we've got kind of three different subsections of people that contribute to the museum efforts. So we've got a great base of volunteers that do anything and everything you could possibly think of, last minute stuff. But also they serve as docents and tour guides in the museum when we're open to the public. They've been here since day one. There's a whole bunch of them that are still here on day whatever we're on now, 20 years on, and they've been there since day one, kind of the life and heart and soul of the museum. We've got education and programming staff and aircraft restoration and maintenance staff. So in terms of actual paid employees, we have 12 employees and a cadre of really dedicated volunteers as well.
All right. Well, we're going to talk more about the aircraft that are in the collection, but you have provided us with some really great video footage. So we're going to show that first, kind of whet everybody's appetite, and then we'll get into the details of some of the aircraft that are in the collection.
Sounds good.
There we go. Great montage of some of the aircraft that are in the museum. We'll talk about a few of those next 45 minutes or so. But David, let's start with the TBM. That is a mighty fine looking airplane. What's the history of this airframe?
So we kind of two paths of airplanes in our collection. Airplanes that we bought largely in the condition you see them, and airplanes that we restored from either partially completed or I guess mostly partially completed, or every last nut and bolt sort of deals. So the TBM we purchased in I think 2004. Basically, aside from some corrections to markings, additions of nose art, and some little accessory things, gun sight, gun camera, that kind of stuff. It was a Canadian Fire Service airplane. So it played a fire bomber role and then was brought back to military configuration in its restoration. And it's been a great airplane. We haven't really had any issues to speak of, knock on wood. But one of the best parts about the TBM for us is that it affords us the invitation to go to the TBM reunion in Peru, Illinois, and party with Brad Deckert and company every year.
There you go. The airplane itself, what does that burn per hour in gasoline? Do you know offhand? I know that's kind of a technical question.
Something like 60 to 70 gallons as a rough average.
Okay.
It's an R2600, so 60 gallons an hour is a pretty good, cruise burn kind of assumption.
All right. So can you make it from your home base to the TBM reunion without a stop?
Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Okay. What's the story behind the name under the canopy?
John Steele was a local veteran. He was a TBM pilot in World War II, and he founded a company called Hilltop Basic Resources. And he was just a tremendous supporter of the museum. His entire family's been a huge supporter of the museum and his company as well from basically day one. And so when we got the airplane, it was one of those things where no one really needed to discuss it. It was just a thing that everybody assumed and knew we were going to do, was put John's name on the cockpit rail. And that was one of the goals of the museum, was to tell the stories of real veterans who made real contributions to our country in the time of the war. And so that was the first one where we really got to plan our stake. And this is we're representing this as John's airplane to honor his contribution to our country.
Awesome. Another recognizable asset in the museum, of course, the Mitchell, the B-25.
Yeah. So that's another example of an airplane that we bought largely in the condition you see it in today, save one big kind of obvious one is that it looks entirely different now than it looked when we got it. It was in the scheme of Axis Nightmare when we got it. And then in 2018, we were one of the two aircraft selected to go over to Italy to film the Hulu remake of the Catch-22 series. And so they told us they were going to paint it in, temporary movie paint, and that kind of terrified me. And so throughout the contract process was all of these things about restitution of the temporary paint and what happens if it damages our original paint and all this stuff. And we flew it to Italy and they painted it, and it was like, oh my gosh, it looks 10 times better than it did when it left. And they, they've got all the faux weathering on it to make it look, war torn. And we just thought that was a great way to, further that storytelling, let the airplane tell its own story of what an airplane would have looked like when it came back from combat mission. And so we asked the studio if we were allowed to keep it, and they kind of rolled their eyes at us because we'd done all that stuff about making sure it got off. And so they said yes. The only thing was they made us hide the nose art until the show released. And it was one of those things where they said it was temporary. They assured us hot water and high alkalinity soap would make it all disappear. But it turns out it's pretty robust. It's been on the airplane for the last 7 years. And it's basically no worse for the wear. You can't clean it as well, which is, for anybody that's been around a B-25 knows that's kind of a challenge. But yeah, it tells a story of what it really would have looked like. So some of our airplanes are, immaculate, like the P-40 behind me or the Mustang. Mustang's got a really, sports car like miles of clear coat paint job on it. So that's kind of a little bit sterile and not telling the story of what it would have looked like when it was doing its job. And so we really like that aspect of the B-25, that you can really get a sense of what they would have been like when they were being used. That's
interesting. The movie paint and EIA had their Ford Tri-Motor in a Johnny Depp movie a number of years ago, and they painted it, and the paint seemed to come off pretty easily. So I'm amazed that the paint is still 7 years later still looking good.
You and me both.
B-25. That's very interesting. I bet you don't fly it in the rain.
What's that?
Yeah, I bet you don't fly in the rain with it, though.
We really try not to. It's one of those things where we kind of fallen in love with the scheme, and so if it ever starts, running the paint down the side, we're going to have to start putting out a collection jar to pay for a new paint job.
How did you get brought into the production? I mean, there's lots of B-25s all over the country, but how did they pick you?
I think there was a kind of shotgun blast approach of look up B-25 operators on Wikipedia and call every single one of them and hope at least a couple of them don't laugh you out of the phone call, which was, kind of how it happened. I was given a phone and said, this is so-and-so, he's calling from Paramount, and he wants to talk about flying our airplane to Italy for a TV show. And I was like, okay, well, the answer to this is 99.9% no, but we'll at least walk down the road and see what it looks like. And that was in late January, and by the middle of May, the thing was doing a transatlantic crossing.
Amazing. And still carrying the paint scheme today.
Yeah.
I think you made out okay on that deal.
Yeah, I mean, if all we got out of it was a really great paint job, even still.
Very good.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Mustang, and there she is, Cincinnati Miss. Was this the project that your dad had purchased?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he bought the T6 in 1999. Okay. And started flying a decent amount, starting to, kind of build his tailwheel chops, and started looking for a Mustang. And the market was a little bit strange at the time. There were a handful of airplanes that were, changing hands and going up for sale. And the combination of a really nice airplane and one that wasn't like outrageously priced was not happening. And he was starting to get frustrated. And my dad's one of those guys who kind of lets the world tell him what the world wants to tell him. And so he was kind of hearing that you've struck out a bunch of times trying to buy one. Maybe that's the world telling you this isn't the right direction for you to go. Paul Redlick was involved. He was maintaining the T6 at the time. And so they developed a pretty good relationship, and they'd been bouncing ideas off of each other when we were going to look at airplanes and stuff. And I think my dad said in passing something like, well, yeah, we went and looked at airplane XYZ, and it's really not as nice as it was made out to be, and they want more money than I think it's worth. And I think we're going to pass on it. And there aren't really any other options out there at the moment. So maybe this wasn't meant to be. And, that's not the end of the world, And Paul said something like, well, have you thought about building one? And I think there was a project for sale that they'd at least discussed. And I was like, well, not really. Who the heck would I have put it together? I don't have time or the skill set or the infrastructure to do that. And Paul said, well, I've always wanted to do that. I would, if you find a project, I'll put it together for you. And so that was kind of the initial nudge of the snowball rolling down the hill that leads to you and I sitting here on a webinar in 2025. And so my dad brought the project, had some more work done out in California before it got put in a truck and shipped to Huntington, Indiana, which is where Paul's shop, Stars and Bars, was at the time, and worked on it for a while there. And it was just kind of a commercial engagement between my dad and Paul and Stars and Bars, that my dad's airplane was being built there, and all this parallel stuff with meeting World War II veterans and realizing that there was this kind of real need to preserve their stories and share it with young kids. And so that kind of bounced around in his head for a while, and he started drumming up volunteers who were going to help him with this endeavor. And the Mustang was moving down the road. And so when the building was completed, the airplane was trucked here in two pieces and put back together. And the initial test flight wasn't much after the building was completed. And it's been flying ever since.
What's the story behind the paint scheme and the name?
So it's two things. One, if you asked him what his favorite Mustang was, he'd say anyone that was in the 353rd Fighter Group. Okay. And so when he decided that he was going to build his own Mustang as opposed to buying one that was already done, it was kind of one of those no-brainer things that he knew that it was going to be black and yellow checkerboard. And then it was like, are you going to pick a historical aircraft? And he picked the name Cincinnati Miss because it kind of evoked a name that certainly sounds like it could have been real. To the best of our knowledge, it wasn't, but it sure could have been. And we're from Cincinnati, and so that was kind of a direct connection between our family's history, the museum, and the city, and so just made to be, I guess.
I guess it's a nice choice. And now this picture, we're looking at one of the rarest airplanes that not only in your collection but in the world, and that is the Focke-Wulf.
Yeah, I'm staring at it right now. It's right behind that camera.
You got the best view in the house.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely something that it's a privilege for us to have it here in the museum. You know, there's a lot of P-51 Mustangs in the world, and most people can say that they've seen a Mustang at an air show, or they've seen a Mustang fly, or they've gone and gotten a ride in one like Gunfighter. But they're like, it's not a lot of people who've gotten to get up close and look at what the German complement to the Mustang would have looked like in World War II, and really gotten to dig into it visually and experience it on the ground, let alone in the air. And so we're really proud of the airplane. We're thrilled that Tom Summer was the donor. We're thrilled that he entrusted us with this airplane to finish it and keep it alive. As you said, it's extremely rare, and so it's really a treat that we can have it here and share it with the entire Warbird community, but the Cincinnati community as well. It's also great that we've got a Mustang, like that initial photo. We've got a Mustang as the good guy and a Focke-Wulf as the bad guy, so we can play the pretend dogfight and put a big smoke system in the Focke-Wulf because it always loses. And you know.
And this is not powered by the original engine. It's been re-engined, right, for reliability.
Yeah, so this was a Flugwerk reproduction airframe. We do have an original data plate for it, and we've got some original aircraft crash site parts, tailwheel assembly. That's basically it for the most part. So as the FAA is concerned, it's a real Focke-Wulf, but it's at its core a reproduction. The kit came with a Ash 82 that we didn't really think was the best thing long term to put in it. Limited maintenance manuals. There was a lot of metric hardware on it. Just a lot of question marks that didn't seem like robust, reliable, easy button thing in terms of keeping it alive and maintaining it. Who's going to overhaul it and all that kind of stuff. So we sold the project came with 2 engines and I think 2 props. We sold all that stuff to other Flugwerk operators who were having struggles with engines or ground loops and that kind of stuff. And so we were looking for American option, reliable. So another one of those no-brainer things. Pratt and Whitney was really the only direction we looked, and so turns out a R2800 is not that much bigger than a BMW 801, and so we had basically everything from a firewall forward is made from scratch, but it's only a little bit bigger. So for the most part, it sells pretty well. We had to add an air intake to the top, which is kind of a departure from the original airframe shape, but beyond that, it's a good, reliable engine that's safe to operate, and fortunately, we've got a reliable thing that we can keep flying and not have to worry about.
Well, and you had mentioned the 2800 is, what did you say, 3 inches in diameter bigger than the original engine?
But in that range, 2 to 4 inches, and so that meant none of it wasn't a matter of massaging cowlings; it was start over.
But if you look at it, you've got as close to the original as possible with putting the new engine, the more reliable engine in it.
Yes, I mean the air intake makes some people and purists upset, and I understand where they're coming from on that. But reality is, you got to get the air in, and on our specific engine configuration, it's got a downdraft carb, so the air's got to come from the top. And we were worried about how much airflow we'd have up there, and all that kind of stuff. And so we just kind of made sure it got enough.
Very good. And the handling characteristics of this particular airplane reflect the originals as well?
Yeah. I think it's, storied bad ground manners have run through to our example as well. It's got the 2800 that's in this has more power than the original airplane does. So it kind of levitates off the runway. It's definitely a sports car. 2,000 horsepower and 6,000 pounds is a pretty good power to weight math equation for sure.
There you go. And of course your P40.
Yeah. Yes. They're a little subtle flex, maybe not so subtle flex with the Lindy next to me, but
I see that.
So P40M Kitty Hawk, it's 2016 Grand Champion. We got the airplane in 2007. Restoration. Some of the restoration took place, structural stuff in New Zealand. It was an original Royal New Zealand Air Force airplane. Ended up in a junkyard. Collector bought it, started down the road of restoring it, stalled. We bought it. Structural repairs completed in New Zealand. Put on a boat and shipped to the United States. The airplane was seized by the ATF as a instrument of war, impounded for a couple weeks. That was an exciting experience. Ended up realizing it was really just a box of expensive aluminum and let it go. So we got it in early 2007. Restoration was completed in late 2011. We had an engine failure due to an oil cooler failure. Paul Redlick was flying the airplane. Dead sticked it in, was going too fast because don't give up airspeed if you can't get it back. And our airport runway is not very long, and I haven't seen a P40 with good brakes yet in my life. And so that combination of variables led to it going through the fence at the end of the runway, tore the gear up, tore the wing up pretty good. And so from 2011 to 2016, we restored it again, basically rebuilt the wings from scratch. And took it to Oshkosh in 2016. The, restoration ethos with this airplane was as authentic as humanly possible. The Mustang's got modern avionics and fancy, durable, shiny paint job. The goal of this was to make it look like it would have looked on day one in New Zealand before the first Kiwi pilot sat in it. Basically as it would have rolled out the door of the factory in Buffalo. And so a lot of time was spent on accuracy and not just airworthiness. And so the restoration is probably somewhere in the 55,000 labor hour range. keeping track of that exactly is kind of impossible, or maybe not worth doing, but it's somewhere in that range. And it was a big chunk of that was in the pursuit of perfection is probably not the right word, but as close as we could make to a facsimile of what it would have looked like in 1943 when it was built.
And it's a unique paint scheme. So that's Royal New Zealand that we're looking at?
Yeah, so this is exactly what it would have looked like when it was in New Zealand in the service. It had a minor incident of some kind in a training mission in New Zealand when the squadron was about to go out into theater, and so it got left behind because it was damaged. And it ended up staying in New Zealand and not going into combat, and just ended up as a kind of bounce around squadron hack, which is probably why it survived in the condition it was in. Post-war got scrapped, cut up into pieces, and ended up in a junkyard. It was pretty sad state of affairs when it got dug out of the junkyard. So it's pretty amazing to see the 180 it's done. But this is Royal New Zealand Air Force, and this is based on reference photography as close as we could make to what it would have looked like while it was in service.
Awesome. This is the T6. Is this the T6 that your dad originally bought?
Yep, Tweety Bird.
All right.
So my dad was looking for T6s, and it was 1998 or so, and maybe late 98, early 99, and he found an ad and trade a plane, and it was AT6, pretty cheap at the time, and low time, fresh restoration, and what seemed like a California area code. So my dad called the guy. His name was Ron Clem. They talked about the airplane, and my dad got to a point where I was like, okay, I think this might be something I want to pursue. I'd like to come look at the airplane. Where are you in California? And the answer was, I'm not in California. I'm in Fairbanks, Alaska. And my dad was an insurance executive at the time, and he didn't have the time, or even close to the time, that flying an airplane back from Alaska would take. And so in another conversation with Paul Redlick, Paul said, well, I'll go get it for you. If that's the barrier to entry, we'll knock that down easy. And so that's what happened. Paul went with his wife Diane to Fairbanks, looked at the airplane, did a pre-buy on it, called my dad and said, buy it now. Ron, the guy who restored it at his home over a really long period of time. It was a beautiful restoration, but I think he got to the point where it was too nice to fly on a lot of gravel runways in Alaska, and so he decided to move it on before he beat it up too much. Interesting story. That was in 1999. 26 years later, he was at the museum just a couple of weeks ago. Had no clue where the airplane had gone. And as he told us, he said, I thought it might have been rotten in a field somewhere. And our collections manager, Noah Recton, he reached out to him trying to answer a question about where the inspiration for the markings on the airplane were from, because they didn't really seem to match anything realistic. And so he, went to the internet trying to find the guy, was able to do so. And, one thing led to another, and he came to Cincinnati a couple weeks ago. We gave him a ride in the airplane for the first time in almost 30 years. That was pretty cool.
What was his reaction to seeing his airplane?
He was quiet, just kind of reflective. I think he truly didn't have any clue where it went, and just kind of assumed that it, just kind of disappeared. So it was like kind of this quiet, reflective moment of, man, it's still here, and it looks, more or less exactly like it did when he sold it. The only real big change is we overhauled the engine. It had a 50s military overhaul in it when we got it. That after 15 years or so was starting to get tired, but other than that, it's mostly like it was when he sold it. It was really neat to be able to kind of make that connection all these years later.
Certainly is. Yeah. Still, it looks good today.
Thanks.
And just for fun, a C-45?
Yeah. So quick little anecdote about our C-45 and our museum. We've got a lot of cool airplanes, and Mike Durkee, our head of restoration and maintenance, that's his favorite airplane. favorite airplane to fly, I should say.
Okay. What's the story behind this one?
So we had a donor named Stan Cohen, who was a P-40 driver in World War II, and he went to Virginia Tech for undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, and was kind of perennially involved with the university as a donor and the U.S. Army Corps of Cadets program there. And he asked us to fly our B-25 to a Virginia Tech football game to do the pregame flyover. And so we flew him to Blacksburg, Virginia in the B-25 in, I don't know, say 2006 or 7 or something like that. And he was 80 something at the time. And we did that a couple times. He kind of made it an every year sort of deal that he funded this thing for us to go do this flyover for the university's football team. And it eventually got to the point where he was really questionable on whether you should be going on multi-hour missions in a B-25 anymore. Yep. Heck, I'm 40 and multi-hour missions in a B-25 will still kick your butt a little bit. And so he entertained the idea of, what if I buy you something comfortable for me to fly in the back of? We'll still go to football games even though I'm old. Okay. So he wanted to buy a C-47. And we were kind of walking down that road with hangar doors that are 80 feet wide, trying to figure out how we're going to crab a DC-3 through that door that's too small. And it just didn't seem like the right move at the time. And so the idea was tendered of something smaller that was still, a decent people mover, but still a connection to World War II that would kind of fit that bill for him and the university as well. And so he donated the money and we bought the airplane. This is an airplane that from the outside looks pretty much exactly like we got it. And, one of those weird stories, in the process of doing the pre-buy, just pure happenstance, Virginia Tech University owned that airplane.
Wow.
Just complete random dumb luck, sort of like, we're going to fly it there.
Yeah.
Anyways, it looks basically like it did when we bought it. This is probably the airplane that we had to go through the most to kind of wring out all the demons and little issues with, but it's a great airplane now. We use it in a lot of different ways. There's another airplane that you're probably going to talk about here in a little bit that'll bring the C-45 back into the conversation, but it's a great airplane. It's in a Guantanamo Bay scheme, which has got some really bright colors and kids really like it. My son loves getting in it. It's the one that I'm kind of the least watchful of when he's running around playing airplane in it. So kids love it at air shows, and it allows us to do some people moving with crew and staff and volunteers and stuff. And so yeah, it's been a great airplane. You really can't beat a Twin Beach. So there it is.
There's your newest airplane.
Yeah. So the Twin Beach was a real asset in the acquisition process of the Albatross.
And how was that connection made?
So one of our newest employees at the time, Mike Valero, the son of our P-51 pilot, Greg Valero, Mike had an interaction, I think, on Facebook with a guy named John Hightower, who had kind of been appointed as the guy who was supposed to find a good landing spot for this airplane. The owner had gotten to the point where he was ready to move on from it. And I think it also come to the realization that it wasn't a super hot market. There aren't a lot of people out there jonesing to spend big money on an Albatross. And so he'd had some guidance that said, well, you should probably point down the road of donating it to a museum, taking a big tax deduction, and that'll be the way you monetize some of your investment back in the airplane. And so he connected us with John, and John connected us with Tom Casey, the owner, and we talked for a couple months, went up and looked at the airplane. It hadn't flown since 2017. So it'd been sitting for a while and had a lot of the issues that come from an airplane sitting for 6 or so years. And so there was a lot of hurdles to deal with. The airplane was at Westover Air Reserve Base in Chicopee, Massachusetts, in an old B-52 hangar, an old decrepit, kind of falling apart a little bit B-52 hangar, which was a compounding variable in making this airplane airworthy again. And so the donation of the aircraft happened in the early summer of 2023. And between June 23 and March of 25, we went there 5 or 6 times with a crew of between 3 and 5, and spent a week just working like dogs, sun up to sundown, just fixing everything that we could find. The actual list of the squawks dealt with in the field to get the airplane airworthy was pretty impressive, and a real testament to the skill and know-how of our restoration team. Like the bulleted list that we came home with I was on the flight home looking at it like, oh my goodness, that is a lot of work. And to do it in the field with basically no infrastructure, only a couple of the light bulbs in the hangar even would turn on. It was pretty amazing what our guys were capable of doing. And when the donation initially happened, our plan was to fly it back on a ferry permit, just kind of assuming that the reality of having a fully signed off annual was not very realistic. And through a lot of hard work, we flew it off on a fully signed off annual, ready to go, and had a pretty seamless 4-hour flight home. It was the first week of March, and we all turned into popsicles by about eastern Pennsylvania. But other than that, the flight home was really great.
What plans do you have for the Albatross?
Well, it's an albatross in both name and in metaphor as well. So when the idea was initially floated that it be given to us, like, well, if someone wants to give you something of significant value and you can do something good with it, you probably shouldn't turn them down, or at least think long and hard about it. And so initially it was like, oh, well, we got it appraised in the $650,000 to $700,000 range. So it was like, okay, well, if it push comes to shove, worst comes to worst, we can sell it in 3 years so we don't mess with the donor's tax deduction. But I think we've all kind of taken a liking to it. It ended up with a name in the process of working on it in Massachusetts, and it's growing on us. We're hoping to take it with us to the TBM reunion in May. We'll fly to our gala in June, knock on wood. I think we'll keep it for the foreseeable future. It doesn't really line up with the World War II focus of the rest of the collection, but it's World War II adjacent-ish. And I'd never seen one in person, and it's got really great ramp presence, which is good because that's where it lives right now. As you see in that picture, that's about its parking spot at the moment. But it's just a really neat airplane, and it looks great in the air. I think there was a clip of it in that rolling video at the beginning, and it's just really neat. So, we're in the process of fixing some of this non-airworthy stuff. The floorboards were a mess and had really old radios in it. So doing some avionics work, putting new floors in it, and see where it goes from there, I guess. Like I said, it's really neat, and we've all kind of taken a liking to it. So for the moment, it's staying here.
Good. What's the name that you came up with?
So Tom Casey, the guy that gave the airplane to us, he was an American Airlines captain, I think in 767s. And he grew up in one of, like, my dad's looking at the Mustang on the wall. The aspirational aircraft that Tom gravitated towards was the Pan Am Clippers.
Oh yeah.
And so that was his whole goal, was he wanted a Clipper. and that wasn't really realistic. And Albatross as a single owner is a pretty big undertaking, but he could kind of see in his vision an Albatross that was done up to look like a Pan Am Clipper. And so the airplane had a big American flag on it and a Pan Am logo above the pilot's window, and American Clipper was in vinyl lettering on the nose. And we were kind of pointed at, well, we have to make this look like a military airplane, not a civilian passenger lifestyle airplane. And so we were peeling the stickers off, and just, one of those everything happens for a reason things. Mike Valero was peeling letters off, and he just got to the point where the ERICA in American were the only letters that he hadn't yet peeled off. It was like, that's a name. And so Erica stuck. It's like a stray animal. If you give it a name, it's probably going to stay. And so that's pretty much what happened.
There you go. You just put out a little avgas and some oil, and it'll stick around. It
just eats more than the family dog. That's all.
That is true. That is true. Well, we've been talking about airplanes, but I also want to focus on your mission at the museum. Aside from the airplanes, is also, as you've talked about a couple of times, is recognizing veterans and and telling their stories. And how does that weave into the operations of the museum?
In big and little and intangible and tangible ways, kind of all over the place. The mission statement of the museum is 3 words: preserve, honor, and educate. Preservation is obvious. It's aircraft focused. And for the first 15-ish, 13, 14 years of the museum, that was where the primary focus was. In 2016, when I came on full time, one of the things that my dad kind of wanted me to point out was building up the education side of the museum and use that educational focus to bring veterans into that process of educating and teaching kids. Use their stories as the teaching tools, just as much as the airplanes are. And so from that point forward, that was kind of a rekindled part of the mission, was really double down on sharing these stories, sharing this history, bringing these lessons to the forefront for kids that aren't getting it in a modern history classroom, or for that matter, we've kind of leveraged STEAM as a hook to get them in, and that part of the education program has really taken off, and it's allowed us to interweave stories of veterans and the reverence that needs to be directed towards them into learning from different subject matters. We've got just go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you mentioned the gala that you held, and I think we saw a picture of one of those. That's an annual event in the summer?
Yeah, it's our annual fundraising, biggest fundraiser of the year. Represents basically half of our annual budget, happening in the course of 24 hours,
right,
or like 3 months, depending how you look at it. But yeah, it's from day one has been a way that we can gather as many World War II veterans as we can in a room and make them stand up and see a standing ovation and see and feel the appreciation from a crowd of 400 or 500 people 80 years on from the thing we're thanking them for. It's gotten to the point in the last 6 or 7 years that the numbers are waning, which was something we obviously knew from the get-go. But I think probably one of the most kind of heartwarming things about that is that they're still around and kicking.
Yeah.
We had a panel, I think it's in one of those slideshow photos of 4 veterans as our keynote 3 years ago, 2022 maybe. And the youngest one was 99. The oldest one was 103 or 4. And at the get-go, one of them couldn't hear the questions, and so he just went whatever direction he wanted to. And it was one of those things where before it started, you were kind of apprehensive, but as soon as they started talking, the whole room was locked in and wanted, and would have let them speak for 4 hours if they could have. And so that it's one of the reasons the museum is here, is for people to hear those stories, whether it's in person or in oral history recorded videos, or if it's in secondhand storytelling by some of our education team, bringing those stories to light in a framework where kids can understand what they're hearing and kind of apply it to their own life and their own experiences, so that they can kind of internalize it and really understand and maybe be changed by what they hear. So that's at the core is not just showing them appreciation and honoring them for what they did, but it's also learning and becoming better people now because of who they were.
And he's mentioned you have a number of outreach programs that happen throughout the year, including open cockpit days. What are some of the different youth activities that you do have?
The list is humongous. I hired our director of education and public programming in 2019, and her job description was very analogous. It was or nebulous. It was like, what do you want me to do? And I was like, start our education program. Like, how do I do that? I was like, we'll figure it out. And her name's Stephanie Feltz, and we would not be here talking if it wasn't for her. Like, what she's done with a pretty blank sheet of paper and no real roadmaps, pretty amazing. She's assembled a pretty stellar team around her, and they're the stewards of those stories and directing that into kids' ears. It's really been cool to watch. I'm mostly just a bystander that gets to observe those interactions, but in a previous life, I taught racing schools, and so one of the rewarding things for me was watching light bulbs turn on, watching something click, watching a watershed moment of understanding happen. And so the fact that we get to do that all the time is pretty amazing, just as an observer. And so they've built up, I mean, you name it. If you're a human being, there's a program that they've developed that's directed at making you understand World War II history and the science, technology, engineering, art, and math that goes into it, whether you like it or not. So everything from a program called Tiny Soarers that's aimed at preschool, toddler age kids, all the way to our Super Soarers program that's a volunteer program for high school students who are helping put on our educational programming. But it's also a leadership program where they're learning life skills and becoming better people through that program as well. Public school tours, outreach into classrooms, or, modern education environments, a challenging place to be. Field trips are few and far between. Funding for that is an issue. We've got a blank check donor that pays for all the transportation costs associated with getting schools out here, but the reality is that that's only one barrier to entry. The time commitment to make a field trip and sacrifice classroom time for other subjects for one is a challenge too. So we've developed an in-classroom outreach program. We bring a foot locker full of artifacts, and so while you don't get to see full-blown flying airplanes, you do get to see a lot of artifacts that are still good ways to connect to the history in a hands-on, tactile way, even if you don't get to leave your classroom. And then one of the things that we didn't know at the time that it was going to be just this like slam dunk home run, but homeschool programs are the hottest commodity at the Tri-State Warbird Museum you could possibly think of. Every single one of them sells out in a matter of hours or days. People are chomping at the bit to get on the wait list. So I think coming out of COVID, homeschooling became a lot more prevalent. Kudos to those parents who were good teachers when their kids were home with them. I was not wired that way. So God bless you all for making that commitment to your kids. But so we've got endless homeschool programming. I mean, if I could hire 5 more educators, we'd fill up as many programs as they could do as well. So it's a really exciting time to be here and watch that program just kind of take off and, take no prisoners and just keep going.
So there's a lot going on at the museum. You're open Wednesdays and Saturdays, but you have all these other outreach programs and things that are going on. Best way to keep track of everything that's going on is your website. What's the address for that?
Facebook, Instagram, but yeah, the website's where the kind of hub where everything is, easily locatable. And like you said, there's stuff going on all the time, and so pretty much any sort of human is going to find something that'll fit their wheelhouse and be something that'll help them learn or just experience the airplanes for what they are, which is a pretty all right thing to do as well.
Well, David, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to spend an hour with us and talk Absolutely. About a little bit of the Tri-State Warbird Museum. And I really encourage you to go visit the website, see all the rest of the airplanes that are in their collection that we didn't have time to talk about tonight. But also, if you're in the Cincinnati area, look them up and go visit and maybe even make a trip out there for your gala this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest thing I'd say is I'm the president and I'm the ambassador that's up here talking to you.
Yeah.
Every single person that works for me is kind of probably better equipped to teach you something about airplanes than me. So please do come and learn the history of these airplanes, the men and women who built and flew them, from, our pretty amazing team here. And there's a lot to learn. Like, anybody's going to be able to learn something.
Sounds good. David, thank you again for being a part of the show tonight, and thank you for joining us. We'd like to hear your thoughts on tonight's episode or any ideas you might have for a future topic. Feel free to drop us a line at media@cafhq.org. If you liked what you saw tonight, please share it across your social media platforms. We would appreciate it, and so would David at the Tri-State Warbird Museum. And if you are subscribing on YouTube, make sure you click that bell icon. You'll get notifications when our new episodes are posted. Until next time, I'm Steve Buss, wishing you blue skies and tailwinds. Have a great night.